D.C., we're a few miles from here. Donald Trump is still stewing and fuming and tweeting about Robert Mueller's press conference and the prospect that it may have increased his chances of being impeached. Among the ripple effects of that historic appearance by Robert Mueller this week, Elizabeth Warren, one of the first Democratic presidential candidates to call for Donald Trump's impeachment, today proposed shredding the DOJ policy that places presidents above the law. From her proposal, quote, Congress should make it clear that presidents can be indicted for criminal activity, including obstruction of justice. And when I'm president, I'll appoint Justice Department officials who will reverse flawed policies so no president is shielded from criminal accountability. And while we're on the topic of accountability, new comments today from Attorney General Bill Barr, who says he's not worried about his legacy or political capital. In his words, everyone dies, adding he does not regret taking the job.
In many ways, I'd rather be back to my old life, but I think that I love the Department of Justice. I love the FBI. I think it's important that we not, in this period of intense partisan feeling, destroy our institutions. I think one of the ironies today is that people are saying that it's President Trump that's shredding our institutions. I really see no evidence of that. From my perspective, the idea of resisting a democratically elected president and basically throwing everything at him and really changing the norms on the grounds that we have to stop this president, that's where the shredding of our norms and our institutions is occurring.
Really? Stop and think about what he said for a second and how appropriate it is that the man who decided unilaterally what Robert Mueller would not, that there wasn't enough evidence to say that the president had committed a crime, also sees not enough evidence that Trump is shredding institutions. Mr. Attorney General, how's this for evidence?
Everybody sees what's going on in the Justice Department. I always put justice now with quotes.
These are really, really dishonest people, and they're bad people. And I really think they don't like our country. I really believe that.
I don't take questions from CNN. CNN is fake news. I don't take questions from CNN. That's okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do.
This was an Obama judge, and I'll tell you what, it's not going to happen like this anymore. It was treason, and it should never be allowed to happen to another president again, ever, ever, ever. I think Mueller is a true never-Trumper. 18 Trump haters, including people that work for Hillary Clinton and some of the worst human beings on earth.
Shredding institutions is his thing. And on top of all that, new calls from Republicans now for Robert Mueller to testify so that they might make the Fox News highlight reel. Rudy Giuliani saying Republican congressmen would eviscerate Mueller, that the special counsel is afraid. Sean Hannity parroting that, insisting Mueller doesn't want to answer questions from Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and Matt Gaetz. It's worth pointing out testimony from Mueller is unlikely at this point. He said on Wednesday that he's retiring and that the report speaks for itself. And in this post-fact era championed by the current president, some are wondering if Mueller's by-the-book dedication to a lawful process makes him ill-suited for the moment. New York Times writing today, quote, Mr. Mueller seemed to expect that the system would work as it had in the past, with Congress or perhaps voters making the decision about whether Mr. Trump had committed a crime, only to see the president's handpicked Attorney General and Mr. Mueller's longtime friend make his own determination that there was not enough evidence to support such a charge. And that is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Kara Lee is an NBC national political correspondent. Joining us from the Los Angeles Times, White House reporter Eli Stokols, plus former Democratic Congresswoman and Washington Post columnist Donna Edwards, making some headlines of her own today. Also joining us is former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance and Chuck Rosenberg, former senior FBI official and U.S. Attorney. Chuck, I've been waiting to talk to you all week about this extraordinary performance from Robert Mueller, and I want your thoughts on all of it. But first, I want to know if you have a theory on the case as to why Barr is so obsessed with bracketing everything his alleged friend Robert Mueller does, going out 5 times before his friend Robert Mueller releases his report, racing to do a sit-down with CBS News the the minute Robert Mueller leaves the podium at DOJ and continuing to disparage the process by which Robert Mueller reached his conclusion on the obstruction investigation.
Right. It seems like it's really hard for the truth to catch up to Bill Barr. Bill Barr is sprinting ahead of it. You know, I wanted to just take a moment to address what the New York Times wrote about Bob Mueller, and I think it addresses your question, Nicole. You know, is Bob the right man at the right time for this task? And to my mind, and I'm admittedly biased, the answer is absolutely yes. What we need now more than ever is somebody who plays by the rules. Bob Mueller is the epitome of that person. And what you see, perhaps, are those that we criticize for shredding norms, now including the Attorney General of the United States, by the way, who bridle at the things that Bob Mueller does and stands for and says. And so if I had to choose a path, even if it's less effective, I would choose the path that Bob Mueller walked. I will say this. Barr holds a robust view of Article 2 of the Constitution, and so perhaps he, and I'm not sure I believe the words about to come out of my mouth, but perhaps he in good faith thinks the President of the United States didn't commit a crime. Fine. He's entitled to his opinion. But he's not entitled to disparage Bob Mueller or his work or to leave him out there hanging. If Bill Barr really had difficulty with what Bob Mueller did, he remains his boss. He could demand that Mueller give him his conclusion. It just seems like they're trying to set up a very good man, and I find it highly distressing.
Let me just drill down on what Barr is doing. Barr is still, Chuck Rosenberg, disparaging and targeting the refusal to say that Donald Trump did not commit crimes when he obstructed the investigation. Robert Mueller, who I think you'd agree chooses his words like a precision missile, said when an individual obstructs an investigation, that individual, clearly Donald Trump, the investigation, obviously his own. What Barr is doing now is, I think, trying to stick a stick in the axle there and stop the wheels of justice from grinding up from the special counsel's office to Capitol Hill, which is where they appeared to be going after special counsel Mueller's press conference on Wednesday. Can you explain why Barr would be so determined to do that? Why the open question about criminality around obstruction is still so dangerous and so terrifying to the president?
Right, because if the question on criminality is decided, if it's resolved the way that Mueller and his team obviously think it should be resolved, then this president ought to be impeached by Democrats, by Republicans, by Libertarians, by independents, by everybody up there. And so if you want to save the president, you have to talk about him in ways that just don't square with the truth. You have to say that there was an exoneration. You have to say that there was no collusion. You have to say that it was a hoax. You have to characterize it as a witch hunt. You have to do everything, Nicole, but read the darn report. Once you get into the details, once you get into those stubborn facts, what you see is a pattern of obstruction of justice. And, oh, by the way, we don't need to convict a president of obstruction of justice to remove him from office. We just have to adduce those facts in an impeachment trial to remove him from office. And so what I think you're seeing on the other side is an attempt to hide, to obfuscate, right, to sort of decode the facts. And I think that's really dangerous. It's not new. We've seen a lot of it, but I think it's really dangerous.
I have one more for you, Chuck, and then I'm going to open this up. But I spent a lot of the week trying to, I have a 7-year-old, so I spend a lot of my life trying to boil things down to 7-year-old comprehension. And I'm not saying the Congress is 7, but you can take from that parallel whatever you want. So presidential motorcade speed. I've been in a lot of them. They speed for safety. They speed to get through sometimes dangerous cities. They speed for efficiency, and they speed because most presidential motorcades drive on closed freeways. They drive above the speed limit. No police officer sits on the side of the freeway with that, speed gun trying to catch them, and no presidential motorcade vehicle receives a ticket. Doesn't mean they weren't speeding. A former national security official said that was a suitable analogy to obstruction, just because Mueller wasn't examining or prosecuting Donald Trump for the crime of obstruction doesn't mean he wasn't obstructing. And just because at the end he didn't write him a ticket for obstruction of justice doesn't mean that he couldn't be charged if he were anyone else. Is that an appropriate parallel?
Absolutely. And I think it's actually a good way to think about it. Lots of people do things that are wrong and don't get caught or don't get charged for it. You know, in the world of criminal tax evasion, not civil tax mistakes, but criminal tax evasion, we know we catch a very small percentage of people who cheat on their taxes. So you can cheat on your taxes and go to jail. You can cheat on your taxes and skate by. But the conduct is still cheating on your taxes or speeding down a freeway, even if it's shut down to the regular public. And so I think the analogy works. What Bob Mueller found was a set of facts that would, for anybody else on the planet, constitute an obstruction of justice. The fact that he couldn't charge the president with it based on DOJ policy doesn't mean the president didn't do it. So I think your analogy is spot on.
Joyce Vance, let me ask you to jump in on what is not a good faith campaign on the part of Rudy Giuliani or Sean Hannity for the public or the Congress to hear from Robert S. Mueller. What is clearly something very sinister and very different, but calls from the right, some of the president's allies, to have Robert Mueller on Capitol Hill to be pressed by jacketless Jim Jordan. What's that about?
So we all know what it's about. We've seen this dog and pony show before. This won't be about asking questions of Director Mueller. It will be about congressmen jumping up and down on their stage, using the bully pulpit to make statements, and then ending their statements with a question mark at the end so they remain within the procedural rules of the House. It's, I think, unfortunate. It may be worth it to hear from Bob Mueller firsthand in that forum, perhaps being questioned more cohesively by Democrats. But this is just another part of the Republican effort to discredit a man who, as Chuck, I think, has said very eloquently, has played by the rules, has tried to preserve the country when those around him seem to be burning down its norms at a frightening pace.
And we're going to get to your calls because it's double-sided, right? I mean, we saw the power of 9 minutes from Robert Mueller to move this conversation, to move people's understanding about what was in the report. And there is a valid and legitimate wish, desire, effort to see more of that on Capitol Hill to educate the public. And that's what you write about today, right?
It is. I mean, I think it's actually really important to be able to tell a story that is a full narrative. And my fear right now is that Democrats have spread this information out across 6 different committees, multiple subpoenas and court proceedings, and it's kind of incoherent for the American public. And I think it is important to hear from Bob Mueller. And frankly, in a select committee setting or something like that, they could actually set the terms where there's questioning from counsel and not from members, where members pass off questions to counsel to try to tell a story. They don't have to have the terms of the debate set like ordinary congressional hearings. And I think that's what Democrats need to do. And if the American people don't hear it in that way, and I describe it as the difference between reading a book, and I read the book, and seeing the movie kind of sticks with you because that's the kind of world that we're in. People are busy. And Democrats, in order to move public opinion, have to begin to tell the story. Otherwise, they don't have the narrative at all.
Where are we, though, in that process? I talked to a former national security official who thought that the moment was slipping away from Democrats.
Well, I think it's close. I think the danger here is that the president pretends in his language that he wants to bring impeachment on. I don't believe it for a minute.
No,
you read his tweets, you look at his demeanor at in a press cluster. This is somebody who is fearing impeachment like, you fear the measles. He doesn't want impeachment. Democrats should not run away from it. And frankly, the Constitution requires it.
All right, now to the people who know more than all of us, the reporters. Where is this story going? What is the president doing? Because the president disagrees with Sean Hannity and Rudy Giuliani. He tweeted last week, I don't know why the radical left Democrats want Bob Mueller, I guess that's you, to testify when he just issued a $40 million report that states loud and clear for all to hear, no collusion, no obstruction. now he's got a different message, or at least his friends do, and maybe it sank in that that is not what Robert Mueller concluded. Where's the White House on the Mueller testimony, on Barr's antics, and on where this thing is heading?
Well, clearly they were a bit nervous watching him on television, unsure of what he was going to say. They had some, imagery ready to tweet out afterwards saying case closed and everything else. But I think the reason that the White House is sending out this message that you do not comply with these subpoenas from House Democrats is because they appreciate the value of a televised hearing. They understand what that would mean for the country, how everybody would focus on it. The president understands the power of television as well as anybody. And he knows that you sit Bob Mueller there for several hours and everybody in the country is watching it. That's going to be a serious moment, and that may change public opinion in a way that a lot of other things have not. I think Bob Mueller also understands the spectacle that would be, and that's why, not to disagree with anything that Chuck said about Bob Mueller and his Constitution and how he sees things and not wanting to get involved in something that would come across incredibly partisan. But that is, if he decides not to go testify, that is depriving the Democrats of that opportunity, just as the way that because he's following the rules, he's thinking, I can't say this explicitly that the president obstructed justice, so I will say the president, if I could have said that, if I could have exonerated him, I would have. He's basically, in the absence of saying that, proving a negative, saying you can deduce what I'm saying, but he enables the White House to come and basically do the opposite. And Sarah Sanders and everybody else is saying, well, see, if he'd been able to prove it, he had a moral obligation to say so. So they're just flipping it around. And because there's that gray area, and because Robert Mueller simply will not go quite as far as would be convenient for Democrats to go, that is, at this point, preventing them from making that case more publicly.
The White House doesn't know where this is going. That's why you see them lurching from this thing to that thing. No, we mean this. No, we're having that. I mean, now the strategy is, Robert Mueller has to testify. We need him in there. We want him in. I thought the Rudy Giuliani analogy that this would be, he would be eviscerated worse than Michael Cohen. Well, Michael Cohen was something that the president, in his testimony, was obsessed with and was unhappy about, and it didn't really work
Dude
out
died
well
in North
for
Korea
them.
this week.
And it was and so there just seemed to be it's like the spaghetti on the wall, like what sticks. They're totally reactive. They're not in control. They're trying to figure it out. They don't know. And we may have a better sense of where it's going next week when the House is back and there's more of everybody's in the same space and you can kind of see the speaker try to figure it out and how far she's going to be pulled towards impeachment or whether they're going to try to subpoena Mueller or who knows. But the White House doesn't know. And that's
they don't ever know. They don't ever know. What's Bill Barr doing? I'll tell you, in former Republican circles, both from people who knew him during his CIA days, people who knew him in his first tour of duty as Attorney General, and people who knew him in private practice, some of them, not all of them, find this version of Bill Barr unrecognizable.
Yeah, you talk to people and you hear that, and then you talk to other people and you say, well, this is kind of some of what he's saying is what you would expect because of the idea that he has about president executive power and how much he believes in that, and he's believed in that for a long time, and he thinks that that's something that should be preserved, and he wanted to step in, and he saw it being eroded and feels this duty. What I find interesting about when you look at what Barr says in his interview, and then you look at what the Giuliani and the others are saying, they're basically saying some of the same things. And it's all the undercurrent of it all is to discredit Mueller. And Barr is just saying it, and the things that he's saying are much more, they're just softer, and he's a figure who he's not bombastic. He's kind of, barely gesturing while he's speaking.
Barr?
Yeah.
He does the Cheney thing. He
whispers.
Exactly. And so you're sort of
and so you're like, you're like, oh, you're listening.
Yeah.
But his message is very similar to these other people around Trump who are saying very directly. I mean, Barr says in his interview that there's evidence that makes him believe senior government officials improperly surveilled the Trump campaign. Well, the people around the president say the same thing. They just say it differently. They did it. They were spying. They were and he actually used the word spying. And then when you look at what he has said about Mueller, I thought he was going to give me a report that I could just hand out. I had to write that summary. Everyone was media was camped out. That's just saying, how did they not? First of all, how did they not figure that out? Were they on the same page before that happened? But it's just this whole undercurrent of trying to discredit Mueller, and he's doing it in a very subdued way, and other people around the president are doing it in a very aggressive, overt way.
Joyce, I would just add that Barr is doing it in a soft voice, but an extremely aggressive way. And Barr, the thing about Barr to track is that their story is changing. The first read from senior Justice Department officials close to the investigation when Mueller finished was that there were no disagreements about the law or the evidence. Barr has totally changed his message. His CBS interview, he questioned the legal analysis, and he had a different take or different words on the evidence. And this is Clintonian parsing, the likes of which we really haven't seen since that era.
I think that's absolutely right. Barr seems to almost be taking a leaf from Trump's book and saying what he needs to say to get through this particular day without worrying about whether it's consistent with what he's said in the past. This is such a level of disingenuous conduct from the person who sits on the 5th floor in the Justice Department and is supposed to be our top federal law enforcement officer. And you know, I think one of the difficult things here is that Barr, on the one hand, says, well, I just couldn't withstand the pressure of the press during those 2 days after I had the report, and Mueller didn't give me what I thought he was going to give me, so I had to rush something out. Couldn't withstand that pressure from the press, but at the same time, he had no trouble withstanding the pressure of a duly issued subpoena asking him to testify in front of Congress. This is just new levels of dishonest behavior.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.